Welcome to Kino Media. We're on the road today in Austin, Texas. We've come to the South by Southwest New Media Show, and we're lucky enough to be with Richard Nash, who used to run Soft Skull Press, which is an indie traditional publishing company, and now is the CEO of his own startup, Cursor. Richard, thank you so much for appearing on Kino Media.
Delighted.
So Richard, the book business is about to experience its own perfect storm, the same storm that the music business and the newspaper business and the television business has gone through. How early on are we in this perfect storm?
It's fairly early for book publishing for a couple of reasons. One is that we definitely only recently started getting devices that were in any way functional for the average person digitally. We really only just got the first MP3 player in the last year, and
that being the Kindle.
That being the Kindle. It's the first example of a somewhat reading functional multi-purpose device. And then the second dimension really is that of the slowness is that old media in other areas wasn't worth very much. A 1932 edition of the Daily Telegraph isn't worth very much. But people still read old books. I like to say that Faulkner makes a lot more money for the American publishing business than Benny Goodman does, and so people are still making money off the old stuff, and that has slowed the rate of attrition in big publisher sales.
Arts+Labs did a panel last week in New York in which Brian Napack, the president of Macmillan, argued that the biggest threat to the publishing business was from piracy. Do you agree?
Educational publishing of textbooks, perhaps it is a fairly significant issue, although I think they can just basically go to the web and password protect their way out of that particular problem. On the consumer side, I think he's completely wrong, quite frankly. Book publishing, for the most part, suffers from a lack of demand, and in a certain sense, a lack of piracy. It's depressing how few books are in fact being pirated, because part of it is that we benefit from the lack of devices in which to read pirated content, but really what it comes down to is that we have yet to really effectively motivate readers to read our books in large enough numbers to warrant anyone pirating the damn stuff.
So why do you think people like Brian Napack are so worried about piracy? Is this a delusion, or are you looking at different numbers in terms of people actually stealing content online?
I mean, I know that we're looking at the same numbers in terms of what's being pirated right now. I'm guessing what he's worrying about is the very, very top end of the corporate publishing business. The books that are selling millions of paperbacks, and a concern that he's going to see significant attrition in the number of people buying the very biggest bestsellers. And that may be true. He may be right about that happening, but then the next question is, well, is saving that business the solution? And I don't really see how saving that business through DRM is going to be the solution. You basically, pretty much everyone, to my mind, who's working effectively, is working effectively by trying to work on that which can't hack a concert. You can't hack a super fancy limited edition. You can't hack an experience or a class. So if you really focus on selling large numbers of cheap physical units, you're putting yourself into harm's way, and DRM and anti-piracy measures, I don't think they're going to be the solution. I think you have to find a different revenue track.
But aren't devices like the Kindle and the Nook premised on a kind of DRM?
They are, which is why I think that the Kindle and the Nook are highly short-term transitional technologies, basically designed to mimic the physical book reading experience on the one hand, but even more importantly, mimic the existing supply chain of writer, agent, publisher, wholesaler, retailer, consumer. And that supply chain is as imperiled as that digital supply chain, in a certain sense, is transitional, and it will probably go the same way of the print supply chain.
Okay, so what you call the supply chain of the traditional publishing business is imperiled. What replaces it, and how does the writer get paid?
Okay, so what replaces it basically is, to my mind, communities. In a certain sense, the communities that have always existed in literary culture, whether they're the Romantics or the Expressionists.
What do you mean community? You mean community of readers or community of
writers?
readers
and I mean, a significant number of the readers in the world are would-be writers. Some better than others, some more readable than others, some more contributing more to the future of art and narrative than others. But basically, writers are our biggest readers. But there are certainly readers who are not at all writers, who are pure aficionados, pure fans. So I see the community as being running from the kind of relatively intense fans off onto the most established writers.
Okay, so we have these communities of readers and writers. How do they replace the traditional supply chain, and how does the writer get paid? How do they exchange cash for their creative work?
Basically, I think through capturing a lot more of the value under the demand curve than publishing has up until now been capturing. Especially in the United States, you have these MFA, but increasingly in the UK, Australia, and starting to come into Western Europe. You'll see these MFA programs where people are paying $20,000 to $25,000 a year to learn. And you could say that that's sort of insane to spend that much money, but there are people, let's say, spending $500 on a class with a writer they really admire, and that's basically, 10 not too expensive dinners out over the course of 5 months, or it's half a vacation. So in a certain sense, they are paying to be able to participate much more deeply in something that they really love. And so I think that's an area where writers can start capturing a lot more of the value that they're creating. You also have the physical...
sorry to interrupt, but I don't understand how that works. You mean writers are paid to teach MFAs? They're already doing that.
They are already doing that, but in a very half-assed way and in a very ad hoc way. Most universities are terrible at figuring out how to operate these things. They're geographically limited in the audience. They're very generic in their course offerings. So it's, in a certain sense, you're talking about hacking education. You're talking about creating a much more niche-y style of education, where a kind of a DIY form of education, where a writer, without having to go teach at a particular MFA program because they might not be credentialed to be able to teach there, or they might not want to have to travel there, can, from their own home be running classes. It's something that they themselves as individuals probably cannot orchestrate, but that the community, let's call the community a publisher, can help orchestrate on their behalf.
So are you saying the writer supplements their income through teaching? This is the core.
Yeah, I'm basically saying that selling $10 to $30 objects is only one part of a writer's demand curve. And
but that's always the case. I mean, I'm a non-fiction writer, and I make most of my money giving speeches. But I still don't want to give away my work.
Right. We're seeing glimmers of this model already happening on a very ad hoc basis, and you're a very good example of that. The top of your demand curve is speaking engagements. You don't give away the trade paperbacks, but if there was a much more systematic way of, doing the $15 trade paperback, allowing the 99-cent download, especially not necessarily someone for like where you are exactly now, but for where you were 5 or 8 years ago, in terms of building your reputational currency. The trade paperback is effective in one part of the people who pay $15 or $20, but isn't effective for people whose demand curve is below there. So there's also the people, maybe not so much in narrative nonfiction or analytical nonfiction, but in fiction or certain kinds of subcultural nonfiction where, I mean, it's the other side of the Radiohead model. Yeah, they gave away the thing for, or close to gave it away, but they also made, you know, close to £1 million with this sort of fancy limited edition vinyl Tom York art kind of project. A lot of people want to engage with an object that beautiful.
Are you saying then that what the book business really needs is a cultural revolution?
Yeah. I think we have to realize that the book business is in fact the writer-reader connection business, and that we need to find lots of different revenue models that will map onto a given writer's relationship to his or her readers, and that the chain, the physical mass-produced object is just one dimension of monetizing that entire relationship.
One thing that worries me, though, about this is that many writers historically have been extremely shy, retiring people, very gifted at sitting in a room, writing non-fiction. Is this cultural revolution you're describing, will it mean that those shy writers won't be able to survive?
It will probably making money in that particular fashion. It won't reduce it to nothing. At the level of the limited edition, and $50 book, but there is a little the kind of pre-industrial gesture, perhaps, in the case of model, and in the case of the town crier, is just sort of like so it may be that is really going to be a kind of mandated by the Industrial Revolution.
So what you're saying then is it's really not possible, you don't believe it's going to be possible in the digital future for writers to survive off
digital downloads.
Or the 12 now. But what about the Macmillan position of making it $14 or $15.99? Then wouldn't everyone be happy?
Demand. I mean, the demand's going to exist. Did 2 books with Canongate, The Death of Bunny Monroe, and the other Nick Cave and Barack Obama read it. I mean, they had Obama to do it because very kind of cool iPhone app that they could charge £15 sterling for, and there was a market certainly for those. But it's not very scalable. It's hard to imagine more than a couple of hundred writers who are going to have the appeal to sort of like endure all the production costs required in making an app that elaborate. And so I don't think that's the broad answer. But the broad answer is really going
comes along to replace it, the Clay Shirky dystopian vision.
There will be a dip for certain, but painful if you're a marketing person. Actually, I think that they are first. The thing with the writer. Used to our customer being the publisher. The writer sold the book to the publisher. The either. Their customers were bookstores. Bookstores worried about who the customer was. But in the end, the thing that really drove all that was the reader caring about the writer. Care about the writer. So I don't think that ecosystem to collapse. So even if a forest fire runs through it, a lot of kindling, or not kindling, of the writing reading ecosystem. Jobs and the intermediaries here.
Final question. Brian Napak was quite skeptical. Siloed industry in 20.
Non-fiction environment. You've already seen that where a writer, audio and podcasts and that narrative. I'm a little skeptical. Long-form narrative is a feature rather than a bug. That the actual interactivity of having to read text only and imagine and apply your imagination to it is a kind of interactivity that video game designers talk about, or social gaming designers talk about. So that the power of the text-only story gets quite, it predates the cave paintings of Le. I sometimes feel that these, certainly in its early incarnations, these texts, this thing you have in America in certain baseball parks where you have a baseball cap, got the fan blowing in your face. It's yeah, it keeps you cooler, but it's really dumb looking.
In 1 minute, finally, Richard, what's Cursor? What are you doing with your new company?
Well, or subcultural communities, what really were independent, make them much more web-based. So that the intense readers and